Alright, friends, fans, and dairy products of all ages, this is Cheese of Ages with a follow-up to my D&D Next August 2013 Playtest Packet Review. Several comments have been posted in that video confirming suspicions I had that I did not place in the video because I'd gotten myself so worked up and didn't think about it. To be true, they've confirmed those things based on things they've heard from Mike Merles on his Twitter and articles that I didn't actually read. They confirmed my suspicions, and also they confirmed that skills are not here in the current playtest packet because they removed them to test the system without it. Basically, this playtest packet is testing how far they can go. Yeah, it's one of those playtest packets. If you've been following the playtests in detail, several times they've done things deliberately to see if they would piss the player base off. And they've mentioned occasionally they do things just to see what they can get away with. And in this case, they pulled back the class options and made them more restrictive to see how structured people want subclasses to be. Do you want an array of options as it was before, where you can pick and choose and basically build your subclass? Or do you want more defined subclasses? Unfortunately, this creates an environment where the subclasses being so defined that they've classified them as career paths and kind of structure, which is a dynamic they're not changing in the next playtest packet. They'll still be gladiators, there'll still be knights, there'll be multi-classing specific subclasses with profession names to them. So they kind of intrude into your roleplay and by just being there and flavored that way. Mind you, this is a matter of, you can just ignore that name, it's just like a name, but you're either ignoring a portion of the game so you don't have to be that, or you are that. So if you want to be a type of fighter that has combat maneuvers, well, not combat maneuvers, but the little tricks that you can add to your attacks, I can't recall what they're called at this current point off the top of my head, you have to be a gladiator. So maybe you didn't want your character to be a gladiator. You gotta either ignore that it's the gladiator subclass, or you've got to be a gladiator. If you want to have the stuff the knight has, what if you wanted to have that stuff and be somebody that was a bodyguard for a gangster and not a knight by any stretch of the imagination? That being a knight implies that you came from nobility or became nobility at some point. Rooting these subclasses in professions intrudes upon your background, which is something they said they did not want to do. Have game mechanics intrude on roleplay. Aside from the fact, you picked this background, and that's your background. That's not intrusive because you were picking that background by writing your background that way. If you're going to play a street urchin that became a thief and then became an adventurer, you can just pick the street urchin background. It's right there, and these are the benefits. It's not intrusive. Having the background mechanic there, and then not being able to be this street urchin because you want it to be a knight-type fighter, and you don't want to actually have any affiliation with the nobility, that's restricting your roleplay. That's intruding. Also, they took out skills to test and see if they should be a core mechanic or not, even though they've pretty much stated that they won't be a core mechanic. They will be something you plug in, an optional deal, which pretty much everybody, including myself, will be using. But thankfully, the system they're testing isn't the skill dice system. That will be a separate plug-in that you can plug into it alongside it, or have a different thing. I don't know how it will be structured. Other news that I've come upon since I recorded that video, thankfully I didn't actually record the follow-up when I originally intended to, because I wouldn't have had this information, is the Bard is going to be in the next playtest packet, apparently. Also, multiclassing will be in the playtest packet, and it's going to be 3.5 style, with a minor difference if you're taking a combat class with a mage class. There will be a weaker form. But if you're going mage to mage, your number of spells per day is combined total as if you had kept up with your levels. but your access to spells is restricted by your individual levels. So a 6th level wizard cleric can cast as if a number of spells per day as if they kept with wizard, but can only cast, like, let's say he's 3 levels wizard, 3 levels cleric. This is the example they put forth. They can only cast the magnitude of spells that a 3rd level in each can cast. So they're not casting the higher level spells. They're just casting a lot of lower level spells. So I can kind of get behind that. We'll see how it playtests. But personally, I hope 4th edition style multiclassing is an option alongside this. I would personally plug both options into my system, where if you wanted to full-fledged multiclass, you could take a whole level in it, or you could just like dabble by getting a little feat there that gives you a little bit of it. That's something I would get behind, having both options in there, because I actually enjoyed the multiclassing in 4th edition to an extent, because you could just get little tricks and not skew from your class. Although the multiclassing in 5th edition doesn't seem like you're giving too much up when you multiclass. So I don't know. Maybe it'll find a happy medium between 3rd edition and 4th edition style multiclassing, where you are taking a level, but you're not losing a lot. Personally, if it changes my hit die, though, I would still want to dabble only a little, rather than getting a full-fledged level on occasion. Though, as I said, both options should be there. Okay, I've mentioned the Bard, I've mentioned the multiclassing. There's also going to be specific subclasses for multiclassing between the two. Like a Fighter Wizard will have a subclass for that, so you can mesh the two a little more smoothly. And they also mentioned Ranger Druid having a subclass in the context of a fighter caster combination, when Ranger's a caster. So there might be a big change to the Ranger. I'm suspecting maybe Spellcasting Ranger will be a subclass of Ranger. That they can, you want to be really combat-y, you want to be a caster, or you want to be a Druid Ranger. Probably, is what I'm thinking they might do, considering they put it in the context of a non-caster, or that just might have been them misspeaking. But yeah, that's basically all the solid information I wanted to put in about the review to just complete it. Although there's been something that's kind of been bugging me since the earliest releases of this playtest packet. They used to talk about it being a beta test a lot, and when actually it's a nitpick, I know, but it's not actually a beta test. The Edge of the Empire beta test, that was a beta test. This has not been a beta test, and by any stretch of the imagination, until maybe just recently, because apparently this is the core. They've pretty much gotten done with the core of the system. Although hopefully it's the one that's in. When they said we are pretty much done with the core, it's the internal one they're talking about, and not the released version, because this one's not ready. Anyway, this has been, until just recently, when they got a solid, unchanging core, been an alpha test. If you're not familiar with the game playtesting terminology, an alpha test is when you are playtesting while still in development. You have the bare bones, barely anything of the game. It's just basically, here's something, the basic structure of the game. This is not by any stretch of the imagination what the core of the game is. This is just you're playtesting it while we're making it, kind of thing. If you participated in the Minecraft alpha section, when it was just you could go around placing blocks and removing them, that's an alpha. They didn't have core there. And then when it went into the beta stage of testing, it had the life points and the survival mode, where you had to gather your resources from the surrounding area. There were monsters and stuff that you could fight, and you crafted items together. That is a beta test. The core of the game existed, and the primary thing, aside from adding in the occasional bonus feature, was bug testing. When you're beta testing, your game is pretty much in final form but you are testing it for bugs, and are still at the stage in which you could add little things to the core, but the core doesn't change. I think you can see where I'm going with this, and how I mean that this D&D Next playtest has not ever been a beta until perhaps right now, because every single playtest packet, the core of the game, has changed. So it's never been a beta. I just wanted to get that off my chest, because occasionally they referred to it as a beta test, and it has never been one until just recently, with the previous two packets that have been released and not changed the core of the system. I mean, they've always used the D20 system at the base of the thing, but there's been enough changes to basically fundamentally change how the whole entire darn system works. If you compare the first playtest packet with the one that you have now, not at all the same, pretty much, aside from you're rolling D20s and you're using D12s. So yeah, not a beta test. Anyway, now that we've gotten all that information and stuff off my chest and completed that review, we can move on to other ones. And next up, we're going to be hitting another beta test tabletop RPG that's going to be coming out God knows when. It's still in beta. That I've mentioned occasionally throughout my videos. It's a science fantasy kind of setting where it's primarily science fiction, but taken to the extent where science has progressed to the point where everything, by today's standards, the technology is magical. To the extent it's not like, oh, I'm casting magic, but that everything is like so sophisticated by today's standards it would be quasi-magical. And also there's a heavy like world building, civilization building kind of element to it, where you are building upon a corporation and like possibly colonizing worlds or establishing a mercenary corporation. And main emphasis is on customization options. I'm a little bit skeptical about it. It's an overly ambitious project, I admit, from looking at the playtest materials and going over them. And the dice system at its core is kind of on the fiddly side, and it could be considered overly complicated. And it follows a lot of rules. But it also, I don't mind the bit of complexity because it adds to the system simplicity in other areas. Like I've mentioned in previous videos, complexity is fine as long as there's a reason for it. Now, I've been ranting too long about this thing. This is supposed to be a separate review, not reviewing that system. So, what system am I talking about? All this information I'm spewing, what system am I going to be reviewing next? And can I be impartial about it, considering how much I've spewed already? Sounds like I could possibly be partial to it or against it in a certain way. Can I do it unbiasedly? Especially considering what we're reviewing next is my system. That's right. The game system that I've been developing for a while and have been mentioning throughout several of my other videos is what I'm going to be reviewing next, because it's entering full-fledged beta testing again. When previously it had been in beta testing, it had to go back to alpha stage. We're back in beta testing stage, and I'm going to review the current materials available and give my take on it from an unbiased perspective. We're going to be reviewing Texodus next, and it's going to take a while for this review to get out because I'm going to put some extra bells and whistles on my own game review of my own game, and we might get more feedback from some of the beta testers if we get some beta test games in. I'm going to try and get a good amount of feedback from other people that are participating in the playtest, as well as elaborate more on game mechanics and stuff to get your opinions on it. So yeah, anyway, look forward to the upcoming review of my own game system, Texodus. Space colonization, corporate building, total customization, hijinks.